I still remember the moment I walked into that oak-paneled conference room, my hands trembling as I clutched the letter summoning me to my grandfather's will reading. The last time I'd seen my parents was 12 years ago, when I was just 16 years old. They'd walked out the door with suitcases in hand, choosing their new lives over me, leaving me standing in the driveway with tears streaming down my face. My grandfather took me in that very night, wrapping his weathered arms around me and promising I'd never be alone again. Now he was gone, and I was about to discover he'd left me something far more valuable than I could have ever imagined. But I wasn't the only one who'd received that letter. As I stepped through those mahogany doors, I saw them sitting there, my mother and father, dressed in designer clothes I knew they couldn't afford, their eyes lighting up with a hunger that made my stomach turn. Before we dive into this incredible story of betrayal, justice, and the price of greed, I want to invite you to join our community here at Revenge Unleashed. If you love stories about people who refuse to be victims, who stand up for themselves against impossible odds, then hit that subscribe button right now. Give this video a like if you believe in karma, and drop a comment below telling me what you would do in this situation. Your support means everything, and it helps us bring you more powerful stories like this one. Now, let's get back to what happened in that conference room, because what I'm about to tell you will shock you to your core. My name is Sarah Mitchell, and for most of my childhood, I thought I had a normal family. My dad worked in sales, my mom was a real estate agent, and we lived in a decent house in suburban Pennsylvania. But beneath the surface, my parents were drowning in debt from bad investments, luxury purchases they couldn't afford, and a lifestyle they desperately wanted but could never quite reach. When I was 16, they sat me down one evening and told me they were moving to California to start fresh. I asked when we were leaving, and my mother looked at me with cold eyes I'll never forget and said, "We're starting fresh, Sarah. Just your father and me." They left within a week, signing over temporary guardianship to my grandfather without even a goodbye hug. My grandfather, Robert Mitchell, was a self-made billionaire who'd built his fortune in technology and real estate. He'd always been the steady presence in my life, the one who showed up to my school plays when my parents were too busy, who taught me about integrity and hard work. After my parents abandoned me, he didn't just take me in, he became my entire world. He paid for my college education, taught me about business, and most importantly, he gave me unconditional love. We never talked about my parents. He tried to reach out to them in the early years, but they never responded unless they needed money, which he refused to give them after what they'd done to me. As far as I was concerned, they were strangers who happened to share my DNA. When Grandpa died at 87, I was devastated. I'd lost my true parent, my mentor, my best friend. The funeral was small, just me, a few of his business associates, and some longtime employees who'd become like family. My parents didn't show up, and I was grateful. I wanted to grieve in peace, surrounded by people who actually loved him. But then came the letter about the will reading, and something in my gut told me this wasn't going to be the simple, private affair I'd hoped for. The lawyer, Mr. Harrison, was a distinguished man in his 60s who'd handled my grandfather's affairs for decades. He greeted me warmly when I arrived, but his expression shifted to something harder when my parents walked in 15 minutes later. My mother, Janet, had clearly had work done, her face pulled tight in that way that's supposed to look youthful but just looks desperate. My father, David, had gained weight and lost hair, his expensive suit doing little to hide either. They tried to hug me, calling me sweetheart and honey, acting as if they'd just seen me yesterday instead of abandoning me over a decade ago. I stepped back from their reaching arms, my voice ice cold as I said, "Don't touch me. You lost that right a long time ago." Mr. Harrison cleared his throat and began reading the will. There were generous donations to charities, provisions for longtime employees, and gifts to friends. Then he got to the big one. To my beloved granddaughter, Sarah Mitchell, who stood by me when others walked away, who proved herself to be a woman of character, intelligence, and grace, I leave the entirety of my remaining estate, valued at approximately $27 billion, including all business holdings, real estate properties, investment portfolios, and personal assets. The room went absolutely silent. I felt like I couldn't breathe. $27 billion. The number was so enormous it didn't even feel real. But I wasn't looking at Mr. Harrison. I was watching my parents, and what I saw on their faces made my blood run cold. It wasn't surprise or happiness for me. It was raw, undisguised greed mixed with calculation. They were already doing the math, already planning how they could get their hands on what they saw as their rightful inheritance. My mother was the first to speak, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Well, isn't that wonderful, darling? Of course, we'll help you manage all this. It's such a huge responsibility, and you're still so young. Your father and I have experience with these things. I looked at Mr. Harrison, who gave me an almost imperceptible nod. We both knew what was coming. My father chimed in, suddenly animated. Sarah, honey, we know things were complicated when you were younger, but we're family. Blood is thicker than water, right? We should sit down and discuss how to handle this fortune together. After all, Dad would have wanted us to reconcile, don't you think? The audacity was breathtaking. These people who'd thrown me away like garbage were now trying to worm their way back into my life for money. But here's what they didn't know. My grandfather had seen this coming from a mile away. In his final months, as his health declined, we'd had long conversations about my parents, about human nature, about protecting what you've built. He'd asked me what I wanted to do if they ever came sniffing around, and I'd told him the truth. I wanted them to face consequences for their choices. Not out of pure spite, but because they needed to understand that actions have repercussions, that you can't just use and discard people when it's convenient. So Grandpa and Mr. Harrison had crafted something brilliant. The will had conditions, clauses, and contingencies that would only be revealed if my parents showed up trying to claim a piece of the fortune. Mr. Harrison now pulled out a second document, and I watched my parents lean forward eagerly, probably expecting to hear about their own inheritance. Instead, Mr. Harrison read, in the event that David and Janet Mitchell attempt to contact Sarah Mitchell regarding the estate, or make any claim to familial rights or financial support based on their biological relationship, the following stipulations apply. The lawyer continued, and with each word, I watched the color drain from my parents' faces. Grandpa had documented everything. Every time they'd asked him for money over the years and been refused. Every birthday and holiday they'd missed. Every letter and email I'd sent them in the first 2 years after they left, all of which went unanswered. He'd hired investigators who'd tracked their spending habits, their multiple failed business ventures funded by credit card debt and shady loans, their pattern of burning through money and burning bridges. The documentation was meticulous, damning, and impossible to refute. But the real masterpiece was this: Grandpa had set up a trust that would donate $10 million to child welfare organizations in my parents' names for every month they continued to try to contact me or make claims on the estate. Not from the estate itself, but from a separate fund he'd established specifically for this purpose, funded by assets they would have inherited if they'd been decent human beings. In essence, their greed would fund the exact cause that stood against everything they represented: abandoning children. My mother's face went from pale to red. This is ridiculous. We're her parents. You can't just cut us out like this. Mr. Harrison's voice remained calm and professional. Actually, Mrs. Mitchell, you legally surrendered your parental relationship when you signed the guardianship papers and ceased all contact. You have no legal claim to Sarah or her inheritance. These stipulations are perfectly legal and have been reviewed by multiple judges. If you choose to pursue legal action, not only will you lose, but the trust will donate an additional $50 million in your names, and all legal fees will come from what would have been your potential inheritance. My father tried a different approach, his voice breaking as he turned to me. Sarah, please. We made mistakes, terrible mistakes, but we're still your parents. Don't let your grandfather's bitterness poison you against us. We want a relationship with you, not the money. It was a good performance, I'll give him that. For a split second, I almost felt something. Almost. Then I remembered being 16 and calling my mother's cell phone every day for 6 months, leaving tearful voicemails that were never returned. I remembered my graduation from college, scanning the crowd hoping against hope they'd surprise me, only to feel that familiar ache of abandonment. I remembered every birthday, every achievement, every moment I'd needed a parent and had only my grandfather. I stood up, and my voice was steady, clear, and cold as winter steel. You want to know what Grandpa's bitterness taught me? That some people don't deserve forgiveness just because they share your DNA. That self-respect means not letting people who hurt you waltz back into your life when it's convenient for them. You didn't want a relationship with me when I was a lonely teenager who needed her parents. You didn't want a relationship when I graduated summa cum laude and started my career. You want a relationship now because there's 27 billion reasons to want one. That's not love, that's opportunism, and I learned from the best to spot the difference. I turned to Mr. Harrison. If they contact me directly, document it. Every text, every call, every attempt. And make those donations in their names, with press releases detailing exactly why the money is being donated. I want every dollar they try to steal from me to go toward helping kids who've been abandoned by their parents, and I want everyone to know that my parents' greed is funding it." My mother actually gasped. My father started to stand, his face purple with rage, but Mr. Harrison was already pressing a button under his desk. Security appeared within seconds. As they were escorted out, my mother screaming about lawsuits and family loyalty, my father trying to maintain his dignity and failing miserably, I felt something unexpected wash over me. Not satisfaction, exactly, though there was some of that. Not happiness, because the situation was too sad for that. What I felt was closure. For 12 years, I'd carried around, always wondering if maybe there was something I could have done differently, some way I could have been enough for them to stay. Now I knew the truth with absolute clarity. Their leaving had never been about me. It had been about them, their selfishness, their inability to see value in anything that didn't directly benefit them. In the months that followed, they tried exactly 3 times to contact me. 3 carefully documented attempts that resulted in $30 million going to child welfare organizations across the country. The press releases Mr. Harrison issued were masterful, telling the story without sensationalism but with enough detail that the message was clear. My parents became minor cautionary tales in business circles, examples of how greed and short-sightedness can cost you everything. I threw myself into managing the fortune I'd inherited, working with advisors and learning the intricacies of the businesses my grandfather had built. But more than that, I used the money the way he would have wanted, funding scholarships for kids from broken homes, supporting mentorship programs, and creating opportunities for young people who'd been dealt bad hands. Every time I signed off on a donation or approved a new program, I thought of that 16-year-old girl standing in the driveway, watching her parents drive away, and I wished I could tell her that everything would not only be okay, but that she'd end up stronger, wiser, and surrounded by people who actually valued her. The real revenge wasn't the money or the public embarrassment or even the legal clauses that kept my parents at bay. The real revenge was building a life so fulfilling, so purposeful, and so rich in genuine relationships that their absence became irrelevant. They'd thought they were trading me for a chance at a better life, but what they'd actually done was trade away the only thing that might have given their lives meaning, being part of something bigger than themselves, being loved unconditionally, being someone's parent not just in biology but in every way that actually matters. I never heard from them again after those 3 attempts. Sometimes I wonder if they think about me, if they regret their choices, if they understand what they lost. But mostly, I don't think about them at all. I'm too busy honoring my grandfather's legacy, too busy making a difference, too busy living a life that proves every day that the family you choose is worth infinitely more than the family you're born into. My grandfather gave me more than $27 billion. He gave me the knowledge that I was worth choosing, worth fighting for, worth staying for. And that, more than any amount of money, was the real inheritance that changed my life forever.